Welcome to our session, Building the Pharmaceutical Voice in the Future Health Ecosystem, Collaboration to Drive Value and Transform Health. We're delighted that you decided to join us for this 40-minute presentation to be followed by a 20-minute Q&A. I am delighted to introduce you to myself and my co-presenters today. My name is Tracy Duberman, and I am the president and founder of the Leadership Development Group. We are a full-cycle talent development firm that works exclusively in the health ecosystem, which we define as providers, pharmaceutical companies, payers, medical device companies, and community organizations that help to serve improving health and wellness for communities that we all endeavor to serve. Bob Sachs is my co-author for our book, From Competition to Collaboration, which is what this presentation is based upon. And I'll allow Bob to introduce himself a little bit more and then off to Stephanie LaPlante as well. Bob?
Good. Thanks, Tracy, and hello to everybody. As Tracy said, I had the opportunity to work on the book with her. That will be the basis of our presentation. You can see on the slide, I was at Kaiser Permanente. I was there for 19 years, where I was responsible for things like leadership development, succession planning, and enterprise learning. I also had a career in consulting, and now I get the opportunity to do things like chair Tracy's advisory board, do some consulting and writing, and enjoy life. Stephanie?
Thank you, Bob. And it's great to be with everybody today. My name is Stephanie LaPlante, and I work with GSK as an internal executive coach. I've been with the organization for 31 years. I started in sales as a sales representative and worked my way up through a regional vice president. And then the second half of my career, I've been working in organizational development, talent management, executive leadership development, and now I'm an executive coach. So I do a lot of work with women in leadership, as well as with executive teams who want to create a high performance culture, and work with a lot of executives on their leadership effectiveness. It's great to be here with you today. Thank you.
Bob, Stephanie, and I are very excited to welcome you. The problems that are facing our industry are too complex for any one organization to solve alone. Improving health outcomes, access, and affordability requires collaboration and coordination from diverse stakeholders, including those from life sciences, healthcare providers, payers, public health services, and community resources. Developing the innovative partnerships and the leadership necessary to address issues like where to invest in R&D, how to implement technology solutions, pathways for clinical treatments, best practices in data sharing are crucial for success. This presentation focuses on the opportunity you as pharmaceutical leaders have in leading the future health ecosystem by building collaborative partnerships that have the capacity to add tremendous value to promoting health and wellness throughout the globe. We offer strategies for building and demonstrating health ecosystem leadership through case studies in talking with Stephanie and her experiences at GlaxoSmithKline. And we also offer practical learning applications that you as leaders can implement back on the job. Our agenda today is to cover what we mean by an ecosystem approach, what we mean by health ecosystem leadership, to provide examples of what we call HELM, or health ecosystem leadership, in action, and how we'll do that by sharing examples with Stephanie within GlaxoSmithKline of leaders that she has seen demonstrating HELM, as well as she herself. And then we'll finally talk about how to develop the key capabilities to lead in the health ecosystem, and then we'll happily answer your questions at the end of the presentation. In our picture of the health ecosystem, we envision diverse yet interdependent sectors with a shared interest working together to improve health outcomes and quality of life. As you can see, it includes, as we discussed, providers, pharma companies, policymakers, community organizations, and key players. And it requires progressive innovation and technology, always with the patient at the center.
Working across the health ecosystem presents challenges. Whenever you leave your home team, you're going to encounter differences. These differences can have to do with whether you're working up and down an organization, across an organization, across geographies, with people who have different demographic profiles, and with people who are external to you. And external can mean from one department to another, from one division to another, from one organization in your sector to another organization in your sector, and leading cross-sector, where you're working with companies with different areas of focus within the health ecosystem. These differences are going to lead you to deal with people who have different perspectives, different priorities, different values, different kinds of expertise. And when you do that, the challenge is magnified. And the further away and the more players you bring in, the more difficult those challenges can be. So while the skills we talk about can be applied as you work, for example, across departments within your own organization, those same skills can be applied as you move further and further out. The complexity of applying them is what becomes more difficult. Let's take a look at the next slide and we can drill down on this a little bit more. Successful collaboration requires new capabilities, new processes, and new structures that will support the kinds of working relationships you're trying to build, policies that will support the collaboration that you want to have, and incentives that are going to reinforce and not work against the desired actions. A lot of elements go into meeting these requirements. And there are lots of things, as I said on the previous slide, that can get in the way of that. For example, different operating models. Operating models are all about what customers you serve, how you serve those customers, how you create value for those customers, how you drive revenue, how you build profit, and how you compete with others, sometimes for the same customers. Those differences can really get in the way. Politics. What do we mean by politics? Politics is basically who gets to make what decisions. And there's a lot of decision making that has to go on when you're trying to work cross-sector about the kind of working arrangements you're going to have. Culture. Basically, how do we do things around here? What's valued? What's the approach to risk versus security? Transparency, leadership style. How do we interact? How do we listen? How do we feel about conflict? All those things play in. And as you get into the interpersonal, our conflict styles, our emotional intelligence, in other words, our self-awareness, our empathy, our social skills, and our self-control, all are variables that come into play as you're encountering people from different sectors, most of whom you've not known when you begin this kind of work. And so what we have found is that while lots of people want to talk about these collaborations and understand what are the contract terms that you have, what are the agreements you make about sharing data, how do you define the way revenue is going to be shared, those are very, very important issues. And what our point of view is, it takes leadership to be able to deal with those very hard issues. And unless you've got leaders who can deal with the kinds of issues I've just mentioned, you're not going to be able to come up with the agreements that are going to allow you to move forward. As you can see, doing this work is difficult, which is why we created the Health Ecosystem Leadership Model, or HELM as we call it. We're going to get into this a little bit further into the presentation, but just to give you an overview, it's made up of 4 quadrants. First, leaders need to envision the future. They need to begin to think about what future they want to create and who should be part of that. They then need to be able to reach out and bring other people together and unify around a common purpose and build the trust across the group so they can then move forward and deal with the very difficult issues that are always going to come up as you try to do this work about how we're going to work together, who gets to make what decisions. And then finally, they're going to have to act under uncertainty. They're going to have to be able to mitigate risks. They're going to have to create the opportunity to learn from what's happening and adjust accordingly. So that's a quick overview of HELM. These things move back and forth, and you'll get a sense of that as we go further into the conversation.
Okay, terrific. Thank you, Bob. Now we get into the fun part of the presentation, which is to actually put this theoretical framework into action, or at least hear how folks at GSK have put this theoretical framework into action. So as Bob mentioned, creating the vision of any type of cross-sector collaboration in our industry is a dynamic process that begins with leaders like you building and evolving a clear vision of the direction that the organization is headed and what's required for success. Thinking with an ecosystem mindset, these people are able to, such as yourself, generate ideas about how collaborating with organizations from other sectors can contribute to that success. So let's get right into it. Stephanie, how does GSK define its health ecosystem?
Yes, GSK has a very broad health ecosystem and is an active participant in it. First and foremost, patients are at the center of our ecosystem in everything that we do. And the other stakeholders vary from patients, providers, physicians, healthcare systems, advocacy groups, coalitions, a lot of different organizations, independent as well as in networks, that all center around the patient. What's really interesting, Tracy, is that in COVID-19, it has created some new opportunities. And our stakeholders have actually expanded in ways that we never thought imaginable before, where companies might have been considered our competitors, they're now our collaborators, which I'm sure a lot of people have heard about in the news, as GSK is working with other pharmaceutical and biotech companies to help beat COVID. So it's been very interesting.
Yes, and thank you for pointing out a lot of what GSK is doing has been in the press, making incredible inroads, like many of your colleagues from other pharmaceutical organizations that are attending this presentation today. It is a new world that we're living in, and I'm excited by the possibilities. Which actually brings me to my next question. When we think about envisioning the future, generating those types of future-oriented ideas is a first step, but the organization needs to be very grounded in the type of future it is looking to create. So can you talk a little bit about the future that GSK is looking to create and how you go about sourcing your collaborators?
Yeah, it is an excellent question because the world is changing today, and we are learning very quickly that we need to change before the world changes. Otherwise, the world will change us. And where GSK is firmly grounded in the purpose of helping patients to do more, feel better, and live longer. Saying that, we're constantly looking at how can we continuously improve what we're doing? What are some other partnerships where different companies have strengths, where we can work together to be able to deliver medicines that are appropriate for different patients, that are safe and effective? In particular, another example that many people probably know of is the joint venture with 23andMe, which is really exciting because we know as human beings, we have certain genetic codes and makeup. And by working together, we can be much more targeted about what kind of medicines we are developing so they're safe and effective for people.
It's a great example of how GSK has embraced its vision of the future by enabling a partnership with a company like 23andMe to really start to understand what is it that is genetically important in terms of improving health and wellness, and therefore making some decisions about what drugs or where R&D ought to be focusing its energy for future health and wellness. So thank you. That's a very, very good example of that particular competency in action. Okay, Bob, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thanks. So as Tracy and Stephanie just spoke about it, Envision the Future really sets the stage. And I love what Stephanie gave as an example there. The whole idea of looking, as you begin to build what if components, which is, as we said, is part of Envision the Future, you begin to think about, well, what if we had the ability to align with people's genetic profiles and understand how those operate. And all of a sudden you begin, well, who could do that? So in the process of creating a vision, you begin to identify potential stakeholders you would not have encountered. And as you begin to think about whether or not that's a vision you want to create, it's time to begin to invite those stakeholders into the conversation. And you want to do that in a way that that you are open to them and they are hopefully build trust with you and are open to your ideas. It's important that you respect both the inputs of the other stakeholders and the interests that they have, and continue to evolve the vision as these new ideas are brought forward. One of the foundations that comes in aligning stakeholders is trust. And the ownership of the vision being built jointly helps to build that trust. And this foundation of trust is so important to sustaining the work. As I already mentioned in the model, you are going to run into obstacles in this work. It's inevitable as you bring together organizations with different models, priorities, etc. So you need to have the trust so that when the issue comes up, the first response isn't, you're just in this for yourself. You need to be able to recognize that you have some common interest and move forward. And that's what aligning stakeholders is really about. So I'm going to bring Stephanie back into the conversation. And Stephanie, maybe you could set up, first of all, an example of a recent collaboration that you were involved with, perhaps you worked with the leadership on, and then we can explore a little bit on how this group went about creating trust, and in particular what the leader that you worked with might have done to help build trust in the situation.
Yeah, Bob, I have a great example, and it's a very senior executive leader in the organization. And he called me one day and he said, Stephanie, my team's doing really well. My organization, which is a significant portion of the organization, is doing really well. We're meeting or exceeding our targets. And I know that we can unlock performance and our potential if we do an even better job of working collaboratively with our cross-functional partners. So I was really impressed because what he was asking for is to help understand what is that X factor that he hasn't yet figured out how to tap into, and how can he tap into it in order to boost performance.
So in that example, how did this leader decide which areas to approach to help him realize the vision that he was hoping to create?
Yeah, so he was a very inclusive leader. He had a team of direct and indirect reports of 16 people. So he included everybody from commercial leaders to regulatory leaders to manufacturing leaders, as well as compliance and everything in between. So he was very, very inclusive because he knew that that whole end-to-end chain had to work and flow seamlessly in order to be able to support patients in the marketplace.
Okay. Yeah, and even within an organization, the groups that you just mentioned, they have different expertise, they have different priorities, they're measured on different things, they probably have different cultures even within the company. How did the leader that you supported build trust across that group and try to agree on some kind of why we should all work together?
Yeah. He was very clever because he said, I want to do something different, which I love doing different. So what we decided to do is to host a executive exchange with other senior leaders outside of the industry, leaders who have teams that are known for being top performers and create a high performance culture. So we had a series of these roundtable discussions amongst his team and the external leaders. And what ended up happening when we came back together at GSK is the leaders were having conversations about what they learned and what they picked up and what really stood out for them. And what you could start to see is that people were sharing more about who they are and what's important to them, which helped them to connect with other people on this cross-functional team, which helped to build trust. Where the conversation went from there was great too, because they not only talked about me and here's what I learned, they started to evolve to a conversation around we and what do we want to bring into the rest of our organization and what is our purpose as one executive leadership team for pharmaceuticals, and how can we live into that purpose?
And what I love about the example you just gave is that the leader took the time to bring folks together in the way that you described, which was not necessarily right on task. It was like, why are we doing this? And the leader recognized the importance of changing the dialogue and brought organizations together who provide a great example of what constructive dialogue across differences can look like. And the leaders that were part of this effort then were able to pick up on that and begin to utilize what they saw in working together. And as you said, to get to know each other, build those relationships. And so it's a beautiful example of the importance of going slow in order to go fast later. It's a great example of that. And before I turn it back to Tracy, any additional comment you want to make about that?
One other comment was, I've worked with other teams, and sometimes teams do this great work and then they put it on a shelf, or they don't really fully leverage what they started to create. And one of the other things that this leader did is he created a discipline to use the work that the team did to create one purpose, to become one team. And they used it as a way to give each other feedback over time. So they kept it alive for years and years and years. And it also helped them to continue to perform and meet and exceed their performance levels.
That's great. And, one of the things I'm just thinking about is, right now, Tracy and I are running a course, an online course for a group of executives about this process. Mm-hmm. And as we read through what they're telling us, the biggest surprise is that they had underestimated how much time is required to build relationships, and also how important it is for them to move forward with a challenge that they're working on in the class. So again, I can't overemphasize the importance of taking the step that you just described, because it does in fact lay the foundation for dealing with the problems that are going to come up as you try to put together working agreements, which leads us to managing obstacles. And I'm going to turn it back to Tracy.
Okay, great. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Bob. As Bob mentioned early on, to develop and execute collaborative solutions, leaders need to manage boundaries and obstacles that are inevitable when stakeholders from different organizations with diverse priorities and capabilities and metrics and cultures come together. They surface the difficult conversations. They take the time to, again, listen and respect the various perspectives, overall vision and common interests, explore options that will be best to balance the needs of all of the stakeholders. Very often, innovative solutions are developed that were not initially thought of by any single leader. So, with that as a backdrop, Stephanie, can you tell us about a significant obstacle that needed to be overcome in any one of these collaborative solutions?
Which one do we want to pick?
You tell me. There's so many. Typically,
I say that in jest. I do have a really specific example of a different leader I worked with. This particular leader entered GSK from outside the company, and was responsible to launch a new brand in a fairly short period of time. So it was really interesting. I was working with him solely to help him assimilate into the culture as he onboarded into the company. And what I saw him quickly realize, especially as the launch date approached, is that his team was being asked a lot of questions from different stakeholders all over the company about the launch, about the risks, about the resources, about what needs to happen. And they were coming from all different angles because he was working as a part of a global team, but there were local teams that were interested because they had to prepare for launch. He was working in the United States, although a majority of the team was based in Europe. And he had to work across all different aspects of setting up the launch, from the research and development to the manufacturing to the commercialization to the market access. Mm-hmm. So as you can imagine, a new leader coming into a large multinational company, he had a lot going on. And as he started to see his team answering all these questions from all these different stakeholders from all the different parts of the world, he said, something's got to stop. Something has to stop because my team is not able to focus their expertise on getting the brand ready for launch. So we actually hired a consultant to come in and do a study for him to see where were his team members spending their time, what kind of questions were they getting, and lo and behold, as you would expect, his team was getting the same questions, but from different people in different parts of the world. So he took that data and he went to the senior executives and he proposed putting in place what he called a governance committee. And the purpose of the governance committee, and this is what he got agreement on, was to be the single spot where a representative from each part of the business could send a leader to be part of a discussion, to ask whatever questions they have about the brand and about the launch. But if it didn't happen within that particular meeting, then they would have to wait until the next time the meeting started. Mm. And what he did is he took a lot of pressure off of his team and allowed them to refocus on the brand and on the launch. And it was one of the most successful launches in GSK history.
That's a terrific example of taking the time to create systems and processes to enable obstacles and boundaries to be overcome as you're trying to push forward a new initiative. So that, coupled with the fact that he or she was I think you said he was a new leader, was certainly very challenging. And obviously there was a lot of confidence there to take a step forward to build this governance committee. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Excellent. Mm-hmm. Excellent. Now, I'm sure that couldn't have happened had he not spent time, as Bob mentioned earlier, on aligning his stakeholders and spending time together to build that trust in his decision making. So,
exactly.
Good example. Okay, we're on to the last quadrant. I'll hand it back over to you and Bob.
Okay. Thanks, Tracy. So, act and learn. This is where the rubber finally hits the road. There's a lot of conversation about what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. This is where you begin to actually execute. And by its nature, when you're doing something truly innovative, you're plowing new ground. You're going in uncharted waters because that's what innovation's about. And the bigger the innovation, the more unknown the waters are. So when you face new challenges, uncertainty is inevitable. And so what you need to be able to do is create plans that allow you to move forward despite the fact that things are uncertain, which in many environments is difficult to do because we're all concerned about the results we're producing today, how what we're doing is being viewed by the rest of the organization. And most of us don't think having steps we take not deliver the results anticipated is a good thing. But you have to be willing to try and potentially even fail at some of this in order to move forward and learn so that you can do it better. And so acting and learning is about knowing that some of the actions will deliver positive outcomes and others will be less successful. You have to be able to reflect on both of those outcomes to better understand what's foundational to success. So look at all the things that worked, what is consistent about them, what are the themes that you can take forward, and also look at the things that aren't working and figure out what needs to change in order to get better results. And as a result of that, you modify your assumptions and you take the actions you need to move forward. Now, clearly, when you're doing this, as we said, and when we went through Act and Learn, part of this is being able to manage the risks. So there are going to be risks. So how do you make sure that those risks are not so substantial that people feel frozen, or that in fact it could have a dire consequence for the organization or for the group that you're working with? And that has to do with making the steps more of a continuous learning journey, not taking too big a step at a time, and making sure you've got the resources in place in an optimal way, not committing too much up front so that you have the opportunity to adjust as you go along. So it's an important area, obviously. It's what allows you to begin to move forward. And so, Stephanie, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about an effort where GSK was trying to plow some new ground and we're able to move forward despite uncertainty.
I have a great example. And this example actually happened when I was an internal organizational development consultant. When GSK, and a lot of people may remember this moment, even if they're working with other companies, when GSK announced that we would no longer host speaker programs, having physicians speak on our behalf, and we would manage them internally. Well, what that caused within 18 months is the need for GSK to bring in and implement a digital organization to support that. And this is at a time when we didn't have a true digital organization. We had some pockets of people that were piloting and experimenting, but from a global perspective, we didn't have anything in place. So I was the internal consultant to the leader who led this transformation. And I was really fascinated to work with her and watch how she thought about this. Working in digital is fraught with uncertainties. You never know if the content's going to be right or the platform's going to work, or there's so many things. Not to mention the reaction of regulators or other organizations about how we're moving into this new model. Mm-hmm. So what this particular leader did is, for certain key milestones, like launching this initiative into our major markets, she would bring together the cross-functional team of the technical experts. So the IT, the regulatory, compliance, as well as the marketing leaders. And she would go through scenario planning and say, what if our plan doesn't work? What are the other scenarios that could play out? What are the risks associated with those scenarios? What are the trade-offs we need to think about if those scenarios come into play? And by having the conversation proactively rather than reactively, she was able, in a more calm, learning, normal business conversation, to get people to share their perspectives and offer their expertise. And she also prepared the team to pivot if and when they needed to pivot, because they were all part of the other options. Nobody was put into a reactive mode. Mm-hmm. So just by the virtue of that, and I can't remember, I know you're going to ask, did she have to use any of those scenarios? I can't remember if she did, but I do remember that we did meet the expectation of implementing the new way of working on time.
You know, scenario planning is one of the great ways to really mitigate risk and also prepare people for the fact that, you know what, lots of things can happen. Some of them may not be good. And we now all understand that. So when something goes wrong, no one throws up their hands and says, oh my gosh, this is terrible, we should stop. And so the scenario planning and other techniques that allow people to accept risk and less than good results as part of the process is so important, because we've seen many examples of organizations where they move forward, they hit a bump, and everyone says, too much, let's go back to the old way. Let's go back to where we're comfortable. Let's go back to where we know what we're doing. And that's obviously not going to create breakthrough. And so the scenario planning and other approaches that an act and learn capable leader does are so critical to being able to prepare the organization and actually enable it to move forward and create breakthrough solutions. So that's a great example. Anything else before we talk to Tracy about how people become great helm leaders?
No, thank you.
Okay, Tracy.
All right. So, Stephanie, you are both executive coach and organizational development consultant within GSK. So you actually bring a really unique perspective to this topic around developing capabilities to be these types of leaders, which is really a leader that can focus on collaboration and partnership amidst all of the challenges in our own organizations and, of course, in collaborating with organizations outside of our own. So what I'd like to understand from you is what are your observations on what's required to demonstrate a helm mindset and skill set?
Yeah, across all the different aspects of helm, and this might sound ironic, is to let go. I find myself encouraging a lot of leaders to let go, because the ways of working in the past, while they have worked, we are in a whole new world, which is just going to continue to exponentially change and be disruptive. So if leaders can let go, that opens their mind up to be curious and to be open to different perspectives and learn information or look at data differently that they would have never looked at before. And by being curious and open, that also opens up teams, cross-functional teams, to have different and better conversations, to come up with really creative solutions in order to provide value to the patients.
That's great. That's great. What advice would you give to our audience of leaders who want to enhance these skills? What's a takeaway?
Yeah. So there's a couple things that I find really resonate with executive leaders when I work with them. One is to go up on the balcony. People actually repeat back to me, I went up on the balcony, Stephanie. And what I'm inviting people to do is to go up on the balcony and reflect on yourself and reflect on the interactions you're having with the people you work with, to see, are you showing up curious? Are you showing up being open? Are you having the right and the best conversations that you possibly can? So that's a way for a leader to do a little self-reflection, get out of the game before they go back into the game. Mm-hmm. The second thing I frequently say to leaders, and Bob mentioned this before, is to slow down to speed up. There's so much power in self-reflection and just taking some time to think about, what am I learning? How is it enhancing my performance? How is it enhancing my leadership effectiveness? So I can be the best leader possible for my team. So slowing down to speed up.
That's excellent. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that the self-reflection is incredibly important. And we have developed, as part of this model, a self-assessment that we're offering to folks that have attended our session free of charge. So just feel free to reach out. We have our contact information up on one of these slides that I'll get to at the end of the presentation. And you can take a helm self-assessment and see where your strengths are and where some areas for development are, and then build some action planning around how to build the skill set and the mindset to be this type of leader. So before we end the presentation, I'm going to hand the mic back over to Bob with just a call to action for you, our audience, in terms of what it is you can be doing following this presentation to begin to build these skills.
So I think you all can hopefully hear that the three of us are pretty passionate about leadership and the opportunity that leaders have to create innovations that truly are going to allow people in this country and perhaps broader to become healthier, to live better quality lives. And that's kind of what fuels the passion here, that we see so many opportunities to make life better for so many different people. And it really requires us to get out of our boxes and to work with others, because no one of us has all the answers. And so the important thing is to, first of all, realize you can do this work without having all the answers. That's what you want collaborators for. So just jump in there and begin to use the skills that we've been talking about here today to identify those relationships and build those relationships so that you create the trust that you can use to begin to think about innovations, so that you can go through and overcome obstacles that will get in your way, that you can co-create these action steps, that you have a growth mindset, that you know you can keep getting better, and that the solutions can continue to keep getting better, and always challenge yourself. We all have a tendency to look for things that support what we already believe. And we would ask that you begin to challenge your own assumptions. Ask yourself things like, what if what I believe about X isn't true? What if this were true? Really look for those opportunities to think differently about things. And then when you go forward, this is hard work. So when you get a success, even a small one, celebrate it, pat yourself on the back, and then just keep going. Again, we feel like this is really important work, and we hope that some of this resonates with you, and that as a result of this presentation, you'll be a little bit more likely and feel a little bit more comfortable reaching out across your organization, reaching out across your community, reaching out to other sectors to really create the health environment that we need so desperately for people to have better lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So on behalf of all of us, Bob, Stephanie, and myself, I'd like to thank you all for attending our presentation. We look forward to answering your questions live. And our contact information is here because we believe that there is such strength in building relationships across your colleagues that are here today through the HBA, those that you meet within your organization that may be outside of your department, to start to talk to people that have diverse perspectives so that you can help them and they can help you in broadening your mindset and thinking differently. So we look forward to hearing from you and hoping that we can help you collaborate with one another. So thank you very much. Bob, Stephanie?
I just want to thank Stephanie for joining us. Tracy and I get to do this a lot. It's been great fun to do this, bring you into the game here, Stephanie, and have you collaborate with us on this.
Thank you. It's been an awesome collaboration. Take care.
Take care.